uh, a material reward or a gift, no? However, in other culture like Western culture, giving them compliments such as praises, no, yung just by merely complimenting them, saying that they are pretty or they look good on their dress is already a compliment for them. So that is how they can easily understand compliments. So in that case, we can see the differences in terms of how women respond to compliments, no, based on the influence of their culture. And that is what we analyze in discourse analysis. Okay. The fifth one is narrative or narrative analysis. Okay, so in narrative analysis, we examine how participants construct stories based on personal experiences. So it is in this type of analysis where we look into personal stories, life story, significant events, and situations, no, that are narrated by our participants. Okay, so what is considered to be important, no, in terms of this type of analysis would be the nonverbal expressions. Sorry, this is expressions, okay? Expressions, even the pauses and filler words that are being used by our participants, no? Actually, in narrative analysis, napaka-importante ng mga non-verbal expressions kasi that is where we can attach, no, and understand even yung mga emotions behind the narrative. Like say for example, when you ask your participant to narrate their particular experience. Say for example, we are studying the experience of a rape victim. So if you are studying the experience of a rape victim, no, and encounter your participant pausing every now and then in the narration, no, you can actually realize na may meaning yung pauses na ginagawa niya in between statements, no. Baka kasi the experience of recalling, no, yung what happened with her, no, in that time may be too painful for her. So that pause can have more meaning, no, more than kung ano yung mga sinasabi niya sa'yo. Or when you observe the participant, you see na parang restless siya, hindi siya makapagbigay ng eye-to-eye contact. So there is hesitation probably, or that not feeling comfortable in terms of sharing the experience. So you can actually get more, no, information on those nonverbal expressions in relation to really understanding the narrative behind the experience. Okay, and then the last one would be phenomenology or heuristic analysis. Now, in phenomenology, our focus here is looking at this case. What we do, no, is that we look into how our participants view the experience or even experience, no, the world. In my case, when I study house husbands with absentee wives, it actually gave me a clearer picture in terms of how men view their situation from the perspective of a house husband, and actually even dissect their experience, no, and starting from the reason why they switch roles with their wives up to understanding their learning and realization of the experience. So again, when we speak of heuristic or phenomenological analysis, it gives you a complete, in-depth approach in terms of investigating, understanding people's views and experience. Okay? All right. So having to know the different types of data analysis, okay, what we need to realize is that doing qualitative analysis is just like cleaning a closet. Okay? If we are to associate it or to make an analogy regarding how we in terms of the steps that we go through in terms of qualitative analysis, we can actually look at how we clean our closet. No, so the same basic steps apply. So how does this happen? So um, what we do usually is that whenever we actually clean our closet, what we do first is that we take everything out of the closet, 'di ba? So kung wari maglilinis tayo ng isang cabinet, no, or ng isang drawer, what we usually do is that we take everything out of the closet. So the reason why we do those things is for us to have a clean start, 'di ba? So para ma maano natin, makita natin kung ano yung pinupuno nating um, cabinet or closet, 'di ba? And so that we will be able to see what is there, 'di ba? You would realize na nandun pala yung favorite na na cloth mo, no, na pantalon or t-shirt na hindi mo nasuot for a longer period of time kasi hindi mo alam kung saan mo na ilagay. Okay? So basically what you do is you lay down everything, no, on the floor and then clear your closet. So you take everything out of the closet. And then the second thing you do is that you sort everything out. So that's the time when you save those that you think will still be wearable and toss those things that you think you can't wear, 'di ba? Probably kasi lumiit na sila o kaya sumikip na sila or hindi mo na kasya. Okay? So basically, you're categorizing now or classifying now the clothes as to whether these are the things that you will be using or these are the things that you will be throwing away. Okay? The third one is looking at what you have left and organize into subgroupings, diba? So in qualitative data analysis, we call that coding. So what you do is that given na yung mga clothes mo na na-save are on one side, what you do now is that you classify all these clothes. So this is now the time that you put all together the t-shirt, you put all together your undergarments, you put all together yung mga pants, you put all together yung mga things that you will be wearing, no, for party. So basically, you are categorizing them in terms of their characteristics, okay? And then, the fourth one is organizing subgroups into cluster of similar things that belong together. Like say, for example, if you have your cabinet, no, meron siyang 4 compartments. So basically, what you will do is that you will put all your undergarments on one compartment. So nandun yung probably mga medyas mo, yung mga undergarments mo, 'di ba? And the things that you use, no, in your inner clothes. Okay? And then yung second compartment siguro yun yung mga bagay na ginagamit mo on a daily basis. Like say for example, your t-shirt, your shorts. Third compartment would be the things that you used for your lakad, no? Yung kung meron ka mga party or mga engagements na ina-attend. So basically, you are putting all together in one group those things that belong together or that are similar together. We call that categorizing. And then, as you put things back, how would you group them to maximize functionality? So how do groups make it work together? So that is now the time when you do the interpretation or the presentation in qualitative data analysis. Okay? So basically, kung makikita nyo yung process ng pag-arrange ng closet natin, it's similar to how we do it in qualitative analysis. The only difference, of course, no, may mga steps, many steps involved in qualitative data analysis. But the same rule applies in terms of how we clean our closet to how we organize and analyze our qualitative data. Okay? Now, this particular diagram would actually give you an idea in terms of the flow of how we process data in qualitative research. Okay? So it always begins with the researcher collecting data that can be coming from your field notes, your transcriptions, or optimally scanned material. And then after collecting data, that is the time that you prepare your data for analysis by checking on whether your data are complete. If there's not complete, then you go back to your participants. Okay? And then the third one is reading through your text by obtaining a general sense of the material. And then the fourth one would be coding your data, either by locating your text segment and assigning a code to label them. Okay? And then from this point, you codes the text for description to be used in the research report, and you codes the text for themes to be used in the research report. Now, what are these words, no? Yung iterative and simultaneous. So when we speak of simultaneous, this is where we realize that the process that we go through in terms of data, qualitative data analysis is simultaneous in nature, meaning that your data collection is simultaneous with your data analysis. Because what happens is that as you gather your data, that's the time when you check whether the data that you gather from your participants are sufficient enough to uh to interpret or to even analyze your data. Now, if you realize that they are not enough, then that's the time that you actually gather more data. Okay? Kaya tinatawag siyang simultaneous in nature. Hindi kagaya or unlike in quantitative research that your data collection comes before data analysis, diba? It's only when you completed your data set when you are allowed to actually analyze your data. But in qualitative research or in qualitative data analysis, at the time when you are collecting the data, you can already start analyzing them. And when you realize that your data are not sufficient, then that's the time that you engage into more data collection. Okay? And then, the word iterative here means it's cyclical, meaning that the process that we go through in qualitative data analysis is cyclical in nature. It's different from quantitative research that is linear in nature. Kasi kapag sinabing linear, it follows step-by-step process. So, meaning that you can only go to the next step once you satisfy the first step or the previous step. However, in qualitative data analysis, it's iterative or cyclical in nature because you can actually jump from one step to another. Like say, for example, if you realize that at the time when you are coding the data, you are missing still data. Ibig sabihin, you cannot present a comprehensive examination of the phenomenon. And so what you do is that you can actually go back to collecting more data so that you can have more codes to be used for data presentation. So that is how it is considered to be iterative in nature. It's cyclical in nature. You can actually move back and forth from the steps in processing your data, and analyzing your data, unlike in quantitative research that is considered to be linear in nature. Okay, now this is the point where I will be introducing you to my study. So I have mentioned this already in my previous slide. So this is the study that I did for my master's thesis. So the title of my study is Honey, I'm at Home, Live Experiences of House Husbands with Absentee Wives. So just a brief background of why I came up with this study. So it was at this time when I am actually conceptualizing the study, when Judy Ann Santos and Ryan Agoncillo came up with a movie named House Husband or titled House Husband. So this is the exact time when this movie was was showed in movie theaters. And this is the time when I am asked to come up with the study. So that's actually the inspiration behind this study. And of course, that's also the time when the concept of house husband is already a talk among individuals or people, pero it is still a taboo issue, no? So ibig sabihin, every now and then makakarinig ka ng mga tao na mini-mention na yung itong tao na to is house husband kasi yung asawa niya siya yung nagtatrabaho while he is playing the role of the wife, no, at home. Pero basically it's still a taboo issue. So that's the very reason why I came up with this study. So it's about the experiences of house husbands having absentee wives or wives that are working abroad. So I had many objectives in the study, but I will be emphasizing on the first objective, no? Since this would be the objective that we will be using as my example for the rest of the steps in qualitative data analysis. So these are the objectives that I set for my study. The first one is to identify the underlying factors that led to spouses' condition of role reversal and wives need to work abroad. So again, there are two objectives here. No, one is to identify the reason why they switch role with their wives, and second is the need for wives to work abroad rather than just to stay here in the Philippines. Okay. The second one is to describe their challenges, experience, no? Third is to find out the impact of role reversal in their overall self-concept. Fourth, to determine the coping mechanisms that these house husbands and other people's help give, no, to their to the house husbands for a successful role reversal. And the last one is to identify the learning and realizations of house husbands in experiencing role reversal. So these are the um, objectives that I set for my study. So you can see that from the objectives, I would want to present an in-depth, no, a holistic uh, picture of the experiences of house husbands with absentee wives. So in understanding this phenomenon and answering the questions that I have and achieving the objectives that I have for the study, what I did is to prepare an interview guide. So what you have to realize in qualitative research is that your interview guide would serve as your main tool apart from you as a researcher, no? Because the main instrument in qualitative research is the researcher, and the tool that will be used by the researcher is what we call the interview guide. Now your interview guide would serve as your tool, no, in answering your objectives. So if you are to remember the first objective that I have set for my study, which is to identify the underlying factors that led to spouses' condition of role reversal and wives need to work abroad, what I did is to identify two questions leading to the objective. So number one is to ask what are the reasons or factors that led them to switch role with their wives, and the second one is the reason why their wife needs to work overseas. So that is my questions, okay, to that will answer my objectives or my research questions. Okay. Now, the second study that I will be presenting would be the study that was mentioned in the introduction, in my introduction. It was mentioned in the introduction that I had my recent publication along with my research advisee, who happens to be Mr. Edna Rivera Corpus. Now, Mr. Rivera Corpus is also a DepEd teacher. He is hired at Rafael Lasatin Memorial High School in Balibago. So he has been my student ever since in college, and then he had his master's in RCC, and he became my research advisee. And then after defending his thesis, we actually um, submitted this study to a international conference. So that is where this study was published, no, in the Kahusayan Journal. So the study is about the pedagogy styles and secrets of seasoned teachers. So basically, this study is identifying the live experiences of seasoned teachers. When we say seasoned teachers, these are teachers that has been in the profession for a longer period of time. In qualifying the term seasoned teacher, we set uh, 15 to 15, more than 15 years of teaching experience as the number of years, no, to qualify teachers as seasoned, no, as seasoned teachers, because that's the very intention of the study, is to actually look into the experiences of teachers who have been in the profession, um, and teaching in this today's context, no, yung sitwasyon na meron tayo ngayon. This happened just before COVID-19, no? So we're not speaking of how seasoned teachers, no, experience teaching in the context of COVID-19, but rather in the context of today's education, no? Specifically yung change in the curriculum in the DepEd, no, from BEC to K to 12. Yan. So some of the questions that we ask among our participants would include the following, no, given our objectives, because primarily our first objective is to identify the perception of our seasoned teachers in relation to education in today's context. So the questions that we ask them is how they describe education in today's context and what are the changes that they observe and experience. No? And then the second question is about their current problems in today's pedagogy. So the question that we ask them is to identify the challenges that they experience in relation to their role as a teacher and how do they feel or respond to it. No? So basically, ito yung mga tanong na inas namin sa mga participants namin. So kindly take note of these two examples because we will be using them throughout the steps in qualitative data analysis. Okay? All right. So the first step in qualitative data analysis is organizing data for analysis. So in organizing data for analysis, it is important that you actually have plans on how you will be organizing them. In my case, when I am preparing for the data that I have for analysis, I actually develop a matrix or a table of sources that can be used to help organize the material because I had so many data at that time. Because apart from the participants that I had from my study, which are the 7 house husbands, I also had 7 more participants who are considered to be the significant people in the lives of house husbands that could validate the responses of my participants, of my house husbands. Okay? So in that case, what I did is that I develop a matrix. I make use actually of an Excel file. So, in Excel file, what I did is that I used yung mga rows to identify my participants, no? And then I used the columns to assign to a particular question. Like say, for example, for column 1, this would be my question number 1. And then, so which means that the box that would correspond to participant 1 in question 1 will be written in that particular box, no? And so on, so that I will be able to really take note the responses of my participants throughout the questions. Okay, so that is also the same thing that you can do when you are preparing your matrix or organizing your data for analysis. Another thing that you can actually do for organization is by organizing the materials by type. No, so what you do is that you put all together all interviews, all observations, all documents, and all photographs or other visual materials. Okay? So that you will not be mixing things up, no? Kasi very important na magkakasama yung mga magkakaparehong mga data or forms of data. And then the last one that I think is very important in relation to organizing your data is to actually keep duplicate copies of all forms of data because you have to realize that as the time goes by in terms of using this data, some may be tattered, some may be mutilated along the process. So kung isa lang yung copy na meron ka, basically baka wala ka nang magamit for the next round of analysis, no? Also in terms of the audio recordings that you have for your interview kasi I made use of audio tape during that time. So apart from the audio tape recordings that I have for my recorder, I had a copies in my computer. So that by the time that I may lose or I may delete, no, yung mga files that I have for my recorder, I would have another copy in my computer and make other more copies, no, in your USB, so that you will be sure that you will not be losing your data. So those are practical tips actually, no, in terms of how you organize your data for analysis. And then another step involved in organizing your data is transcribing your data. So one of the definitions in our activity today would be the transcribing techniques. Well, today I will be teaching you how you will be transcribing your data. So let me actually present you an example of a transcript that I prepared um, for my study. No? So this is an example of a transcript. Can you see this? This Microsoft Word file in my screen. Nakikita nyo ba to? Okay. Can you say yes if you can see it? Anyone? Can you see the MS
Yes
Word?
po, sir.
Okay. All right. So this is an example of a transcript, no, that I did for the study that I conducted for my house husband. So in preparing your transcript, no, it's just very simple. So what you do is that you just have to transcribe everything that you hear from your audio tape recordings, no? So basically, ang ginawa ko lang is that I label yung mga statements coming from me as the interviewer and the statements coming from my participant, no, as my interviewee. So I just coded myself J, no, which stands for my first name, and then P1 refers to my participant 1. By the way, in terms of preparing your data, it's important that you um, use pseudonyms in relation to your participant's identity, because you have to remember that things needed to be kept confidential, lalong-lalo na if you're studying sensitive topics. In my case, since this is about the experiences of house husbands, and not all house husbands are proud to be house husbands, so it's important for me to safeguard their identity. That is why even in my transcription, I already coded them. So I made use of letter, no, P, which stands for participant, and 1 for their number, assigned number. So this whole transcript is just for my participant 1. And if you see the number of page, I had 28 pages. So you would realize then that when you transcribe your data in your audio recordings, even if your audio recording run for an hour, you would expect that you would have more pages, no, of text, kasi ang daming pwedeng pag-usapan at ang daming pwedeng masabi ng mga participants nyo in relation to the questions that you ask of them, no? Kaya importante na tinitake note nyo lahat ng mga sinasabi nila, because if you miss certain details in your study, then you might be missing important information in the presentation of your data. So I think that is, no, the advantage of using an audio tape recording rather than just relying on your notes. But of course, the condition behind the use of audio tape recording would be dependent on your participants' consent. If your participants gave you the consent to use audio recording, then better. But if your participants did not give their consent in relation to using audio tape recording, then you can rely on your own notes. Okay? And that would be quite tedious on your part, kasi you will be writing but at the same time listening to your participants responses. Okay, so again, my suggestion is that you ask your participants if it is okay for you to audio tape record your uh, conversation, so that you could just go back to your recordings after your interview. Okay, so again, ang gagawin nyo lang is that you will just transcribe verbatimly kung paano sinabi ng mga participants nyo yung mga sagot nila at kung paano kayo nagtanong. Okay? So in my case, what I did is that I translated yung transcript ko, no? Kasi the language that I used for the interview is Tagalog. Kasi ang mga participants ko, when I weighed in regarding the characteristics and qualifications of my participants, not of them are considered to be highly educated. Some are elementary graduates. So I opted to use Tagalog and actually asked them kung what's the language that they are most comfortable in using in relation to interview, and most of them said Tagalog. So the conversation happened in Tagalog, but I needed to translate the conversation to English because I presented my thesis in the English language. No, so the format for the medium of uh, communication that is required for my thesis is English. That is why I have to translate it. So in your case, kung Tagalog major ka, Filipino major kayo, there's no worry in terms of translating it. No, but if you are presenting your study in an international conference where the medium of communication is English, then it's important that you translate them. Okay? So yan. So i-transcribe nyo lang as it is kung ano yung mga napag-usapan ninyo from one question to another until you finish all the questions. Okay? Yan. So, practical tips in terms of transcribing your data. One, you have to create 2-inch margins on each side of the text data so that you can jot down yung mga notes nyo during the analysis. And then you have to highlight or mark in some way the questions asked by the interviewer. Kasi kung magkakasunod-sunod yan, yung verbatim, yung transcription nyo, dire-diretso, it's important that you mark yung mga questions nyo so that you would know that this is the point where your participant ends his answer on the previous question and you are entering into the next set of questions and answers. Okay? And then you are to use complete detailed headers that contain information about the interview. That's important kasi there might be possibility that you might experience dangling of information. No? Minsan, yung interview transcript na pala to is not for participant 1 but for participant 3 kasi hindi mo na-label ng maayos. So it's important that you lay them very carefully. And then you have to transcribe all words and type the word pause to indicate when interviewees take a lengthy break in their comments. Most especially if you're doing a narrative analysis. I mentioned in narrative analysis that what is more important in terms of their narration would be the nonverbal expressions and even the filler words and pauses that they do in between words. So you also need to put the word pause, no, when they pause in their narration, because that would indicate something more. No, it would mean something, no, in terms of narrating their experience. Okay. Now, we're done with the first step, which is organizing your data. We move now to the second step, which is exploring and coding the data. Now, in exploring and coding the data, the first step that you need to have is to explore the general sense of data by making a preliminary exploratory analysis. So, what we mean by preliminary exploratory analysis here is that we make a skim and scan of the data that you gather from your participants. So after transcribing your data, what you do is that you read through your participants' transcripts and see whether you capture all the things that has been mentioned by your participants. And this is the time when you actually write your memos in the margin of your field notes or under photographs. Now, these memos are short phrases, ideas, concepts, and hunches that occur to you. Because at the time when you're reading your participants' transcripts, that's the time when you can actually think of certain ideas in mind, no? So, bakit kaya niya to sinabi? O ano kaya ang ibig niyang sabihin sa statement na to? So, in that case, you can start writing your memos. Okay? So, after exploring the general sense of data, that's the time now that you move to the next sub-step, which is coding the data. Now, coding the data would entail what we call coding. So the coding is a process, or coding is the process of segmenting and labeling text to form descriptions and broad themes in the data. Now, this is an inductive process of narrowing data into a few themes. If you remember, the example that I give you in thematic analysis, diba? So in thematic analysis, again, what we do is that we start from identifying the codes from the participants' direct responses or from the participants' transcripts. And then from those codes, we move to broader concepts to form what we call themes or categories, which follows what we call the inductive process or inductive approach, diba? So that is how we code. So we segment and label the text to form data, descriptions, and broad themes in the data. So in coding the data, there is sub-step. No? So number one is getting a sense of the whole. This is similar to the first step under coding the data, which is yung getting a general sense of the whole, or what we call familiarization. So it is at this time now that you are looking now at the codes, no, that might possibly be identified in your transcript, no? So in familiarization stage, what you do is that you obtain a general sense of the information and reflect on its overall meaning. What you also do is that you read all the transcriptions carefully and jot down in the margins some ideas as they come to mind, okay? So which is similar to exploring the data in the first step. Okay. Now, this is actually a visual model in terms of how we do the coding process in qualitative research. So, what usually happen is that we always begin with many pages of text. So, kung matatandaan nyo yung transcript ko kanina, di ba? It's 28 pages, which is the total number of pages that you gather from just one sample or one participant. So from that many pages of text, what you do is that you initially read through the text data so that you could get a general sense of what your participants are saying or narrating. And then from this many pages of text, you now delimit it to many segments of text, okay? So from many pages, what you do is that you limit it to many segments. Ibig sabihin, mga short phrases or mga short paragraphs na sila. So what you do is that you divide the text into segments of information, and mostly in terms of segmenting, you actually classify those responses that are considered to be within the same line, no? Ibig sabihin, pareho yung mga sinasabi nila. Like say for example, if you're asking them regarding questions like identifying the reasons why they switch role with their wives. So basically, your participants might be giving you so many answers, but make sure that all of those answers are still relevant to the question on the reasons why they switch role, no? So you would realize naman na this particular statement may be off dun sa question mo because they might be saying something else or something different, no, from this point. So that is how we actually segment those answers, okay? And then from many segments of text, what we do is that you make you identify 30 to 40 codes. And by doing so, what we do is that we label the segments of information with codes. So from text segments, yung mga statements, pwede silang mga sentences, no? What we do is that we convert them to codes, no? And from this point, you can get 30 to 40 codes, no? And then, as you progress, these codes would be reduced to 20, okay? Because what you will be doing now is that you will be looking at those codes that are considered to be redundant, no? So we reduce overlap and redundancy of codes kasi there might be possibility na dun sa 30 to 40 codes na yon, merong mga dalawa or tatlong codes na may mean the same thing, no? They may be worded differently, but they may mean the same thing. Kaya what you can do is that you could group them together with as a single code, okay? So from this point, having to reduce your codes to 20, these codes now will be reduced to 5 to 7 themes, okay? That is by collapsing your codes into themes. Ibig sabihin, from the codes, you are now classifying them all together, no, in a theme. And in classification, you can have 5 to 7 themes, okay? We can actually better understand this coding process as we go on with the steps, okay? So the second step in coding the data is beginning the process of coding the document. So in this step, what we do is that we identify the text segments, placing a bracket around them and assigning a code word or phrase, no? So in this step, what we do is that we identify text segments. So what are text segments? So text segments are sentences or paragraphs that all relate to a single code. So I will be giving you an example. So if you are to look at the sample interview transcript, no, so this is coming from my participant one, and uh, this particular transcript is about asking my participant regarding the reason why they switch role with their wives. And basically what is highlighted in color red, no, is considered to be a text segment. So basically a text segment is the group of words that you gather from your participants as their answers to your question. Okay? So in the example, ang participant 1, ang sagot niya dun sa tanong kung bakit nag-switch role sila ng kanilang wife is because during that time, he is working for URC at Jack and Jill and his salary is just minimum. Okay? So that is the text segment. That is the answer of your participant directly from the question. Now, in text segment, what we do is that we collapse it into specific label we call codes, okay? And codes are labels used to describe a segment of text or an image. Now, if you are to look at this particular text segment, it's quite lengthy, no? Medyo mahaba siya. But if you are to look carefully at this particular text segment, it may mean only that the husband has a minimum salary. So what you can do is that you can shorten this text segment into a code. And the code that I used for this text segment is husband's minimum salary. No? Kasi yun yung mismong sinasabi niya regarding dun sa reason kung bakit nag-switch role sila ng kanyang wife. And that is because of his minimum salary. So from the text segment, which is a lengthy group of words, no, we collapse it into a shorter phrase we call code. All right? So gets ba yon? So in another example, for participant 3, ang sabi niya doon sa tanong kung bakit nag-switch role sila ng kanyang wife is that at first he was applying but he can't leave then. So her wife tried to apply, though he doesn't like it, he insisted to go abroad. So in this text segment, what I use as a code is no available job opportunity for the husband. Kasi yun yung sinasabi niya na dahilan kung bakit nag-switch role sila ng kanyang wife. Kasi at that time daw, walang available na opportunity, job opportunity para sa kanya. That is why the code that I used to represent this text segment is no available job opportunity for the husband. So that is how you take a code from a text segment. So you can now see the inductive process happening, no, in the transcript. So from the many pages, you are now segmenting it into shorter units, diba? Or to smaller units, and now making it them shorter, no? So ibig sabihin kung short na yon, so shorter nyo pa siya, no? By assigning a code to those text segments. Okay? Now, there is also a term we call in vivo codes. Now, in vivo codes are codes in the participant's actual words. In the example that I gave you, these are not the actual words that is used by the participants, no? So this is not the actual words that were taken directly from the participants' words, but rather these are parang the consolidated, collapsed term that was used to represent the statements coming from your participants. However, there would be cases that you can actually get your participants' actual words to mean as codes, okay? So from this example, you can see that the responses coming from the participants. No, by the way, the question regarding this transcript, no, is about the strength that the participants see on Greenfield as a community and how it relate to schools, no? So yun yung parang tanong sa mga participants. And you can actually see yung mga words na nakabox such as close-knit community, health of the community, community's values, change is threatening, were used as codes, no, themselves in the study. So hindi na sila pinalitan, no, hindi na sila reword, but rather they were taken directly from the participants' transcripts to be considered as your code. Okay, so pwede naman yon. Pwede nyong gamitin yung participants' actual words in getting the or in identifying your codes. Okay? So gets ba natin yung process kung paano natin ina-identify yung codes dun sa mga text segments? So from a paragraph or sentences, we actually assign or identify a code that would best represent that particular text segment or response, no? In English, no, we call that the main idea. Diba in high school when we were taught in English to read a particular, say for example, story, and you will be asked to identify the main idea of the story, we actually put it in a word or a group of words, diba? So that is also similar to coding. So what we do is that we identify a code that best represent what your participant said, okay? In either their actual words or a word that summarize, no, the response given by your participants. Okay, so gets ba natin yon? Yung coding na ginagawa natin out of the text segments? Yes? Alright. So now, this is the time that we will be applying what we've learned so far, no? So, I will be presenting you with an example transcript, okay? So, this is a transcript that I got from my study also in House Husband. So, the question here is to identify the significant learning that my participants realize in adopting the role of a house husband. So, you can actually see here the responses coming from different participants. No? Meron tayong participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, and participant 4. So, your task now is to identify the codes that would best represent, no, the text segments that are present in our participants' transcripts. So these are text segments, okay? These are examples of text segments. So your goal now is to identify from the text segment the code that best represent the idea that your participants are saying in relation to the significant learning they realize in adopting the role of the house husband. So what I will ask of you is that you screenshot this transcript, and then later on, I will be asking you to type in the codes that you identified in menti.com. So later, after nyo na ma-identify yung mga codes natin, you have to go to menti.com and use the code 62306957 in entering your answers. Okay? So again, kindly screenshot this transcript muna. Okay, so again, kindly screenshot this transcript, and then if you have your paper with you or your laptop with you, you can actually type in, no, the initial codes that comes to your mind that you think would best represent the text segments. And then once you already have those codes, you type those codes at menti.com using the code. All right, and I will be waiting for your answer. So this would be our exercise for this part of the webinar. Alright? So clear tayo so far dun sa activity natin. Okay, so
Yes, sir.
alright, so now that you have your copy with you, you can start identifying the codes and then you can now type in your answers at menti.com if you're done with the task. Alright? Okay, so I will just be waiting for your answers. Okay. Alright, so open ko yung menti.com so that I would see whether